If you're here ready to do this program, then you must not be sleeping as well as you'd like. You might have tried lots of different things to help you sleep, but the assumption is that none of them are really working. Perhaps you could just take a minute or two just to have a think about some of the things that you've tried and may still be trying. It might be helpful to actually write them down to be able to see them in black and white. So if you want, pause the video and get a pen and make a few notes. And when you've got a list of those things that you've tried or you're trying, have a think about how much they've helped. They may well help a little bit in the short term. We usually do things for a good reason, so it may be that they work a little bit, but what about in the long term? I would assume that in the long term they're not working, otherwise why would you be here? So be honest about it. How well are those things working in the long term? And if they're not working, how willing are you to try something maybe completely new? How willing are you to approach that with a spirit of open-mindedness and curiosity? How willing are you to put aside those things that you've tried or may be trying and start completely afresh? Now, it may be that some of those things, they might come back in again, but perhaps with a slightly different spirit. So there may be a different way of looking at the problem from what you've tried in the past. And that's what, hopefully, we're going to show you. So let's begin. So it's true to say that most people with pain, nearly all people with pain, would report difficulties with sleep. And that may not seem an unreasonable thing, really. So having pain might make it difficult to get to sleep, or it might wake us in the middle of the night, this kind of thing. It seems pretty logical and obvious, really. But when you look at it a bit more closely, the research seems to show that the link between sleep and pain is a little bit more complicated than that. And that's probably not unreasonable, really, because we are quite complicated creatures. We've divided the program up into 7 parts. We'd advise that you take at least a few days between doing each part. And this is particularly true in the later stages where there are some things to work on, some exercises to practice. You might also find that it's useful to go over some of these parts, or maybe all of these parts, more than once. What does a good sleeper do to get sleep? The answer, of course, is nothing. A good sleeper actually is able to trust the body to do what it wants to do. And a good sleeper doesn't get caught up in worrying about sleep or trying too hard to get to sleep. If you think about it, trying to get to sleep actually makes sleep more difficult. And I'm sure you've experienced that at some point in the past. Most of us have. On those occasions that we might be tossing and turning in bed, the more we try to drop off, the more difficult it becomes. So getting to sleep effectively might be about giving up the attempt to make it happen. And there are things we can do that might make it more likely to happen, but it's a natural process, and that process needs to be allowed rather than forced. It can be helpful to know a little bit about the mechanics of sleep, about the science of how sleep works. So let's begin now by taking a look at some of the things that we've discovered about the curious business of sleep. We need to sleep. It does important things for us. And it seems that we need somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. So younger people need more around 9 hours. And older people need somewhat less, so around the 7-hour mark. It's true that actually there's no sort of fixed right amount of sleep. So it's quite variable between individuals. And so what you need might be a little bit more or a little bit less than what other people in your friends and family might need. And sleep does some very important things. So it helps to strengthen our immune function, it helps us to store memories, and it helps with tissue repair, amongst other things. We might think of good sleep as just slipping into unconsciousness, staying there for 8 hours, and then emerging bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at the end of it. But, as is often the case, it is a bit more complicated than that. And it turns out that we sleep in chunks, and these chunks are about 90 minutes long, sometimes a little bit longer. And during each of these 90-minute chunks, we go down through different brainwave states, from normal waking consciousness, which has a particular brainwave pattern, down to the slow wave pattern that we see in deep restorative recovery sleep. And then towards the end of the 90 minutes, we have a little burst of what's called rapid eye movement sleep. And then we'll come back up to the surface again and may actually wake up or may just sleep in a very shallow way before diving down into the next 90-minute cycle. And it's quite normal for us to wake up in these periods when we come to the surface. So during a normal night, there are about 5 of these chunks. So there are also 5 periods that we might wake. So it's quite normal to wake up a number of times through the night. Sleep cycles and pain. When we are asleep, we're obviously very vulnerable. So in our early history, that would have made us rich pickings for predators. And it's this fact of this very significant vulnerability that made biologists pretty convinced that sleep might do some important things, and that led to further research into sleep. To offset the fact that we're so vulnerable, during the lighter periods of sleep, so the more shallow periods of sleep during those 90-minute chunks, the brain's on the lookout for important or dangerous things that might be happening. And so we're easily woken during those periods. And it's the case that if we wake, we'll generally forget about it unless something grabs our attention. Now, obviously, if you've got pain, that thing that grabs your attention is most likely to be pain. And so when we wake up, there's the pain, it takes up our attention, it drives us mad probably, and we certainly remember that waking the next day.